Hi everyone, welcome back to the Stitch Sessions. This week we are working on this super cute, cozy, messy bun bobble hat. And this is actually really quick and easy to work on, believe it or not. Despite all this cushy, beautiful texture, it really is fairly beginner friendly. So we are working this up in actually one long rectangular piece, and we're going to go through how to put it together and how to create the little opening at the top so that you can pull your ponytail or your messy bun through. So these hats have been quite popular for the last several years, and whether you're a knitter or a crocheter or just someone who loves these hats, this is going to be a really fun project to work on. So I'm really excited about taking you all through this. So without further ado, let's grab all of our materials and let's get stitching up our messy bun hat. Oh, and one more thing. If you're new here and you haven't clicked that subscribe button yet, make sure that you do so and click that notification bell so you stay up to date on all of the tutorials I upload every week on Wednesday morning. Come along and join me on my crochet journey. Now, let's get stitching. So here are the materials you're going to need to make your messy bun hat. For the yarn, I am using this yarn by Loops and Threads. It's called Ring Spun. Now, this yarn was gifted to me. I haven't seen it around, so it may be discontinued, or you may have to go directly to Loops and Threads website, but it comes in a 100-gram skein, which has 159 yards or 145 meters. This is enough for me. It will depend on the size of your hat, of course. This was just enough for me. I have an average head size, and we'll discuss that in a moment when we talk about measurements. So I always would say buy a couple of these skeins. Now, this is considered a bulky size 5, but when I look at it, I really consider it a little bit more towards a medium size 4-weight yarn. And just in case you are wondering, the color is magenta. Okay. And the hook size I'm going to be using for this project is what is recommended for this yarn, which is a 6.5 millimeter hook, which is also known as a size K or a 10.5. Okay. And you want to make sure that you always have a pair of scissors on hand and a trusty darning needle to sew in your ends. So let's get started. As you can see, I've already kind of pulled out my center here. So let's get cooking. You are also going to need an elastic hair tie for the top of your messy bun hat. The other thing you're going to need is a trusty measuring tape, and this will help you figure out how long to make your fabric to fit around the head that you're making it for. So you want to have that on hand. To begin, you want to place a slip knot on your hook. Okay. Okay, so we are going to work this hat, I guess we're going to call it sideward, and I'll show you what I mean. So I've already got majority of my hat done here. And so we are actually working this project from the side and working our way across until we get the length that we need to wrap around our head. So you can see I've already got my length done here, and I'm going to take you through how we are going to create the brim as well as the main body of the hat as we go along. Okay. So for this pattern, you want to chain whatever the length is that you need for your hat height. For me, I usually need about 10 inches, but I'm going to stop just short of that because we're not making the full hat. We're going to leave an opening at the top. So you just want to make sure that you chain an odd number of chains. Whatever it is, the length that you need, you want to chain an odd number. So I am chaining 23 chains. And this is my 23rd chain. And I just want to make sure that they're nice and even. Okay. And I want to make sure that they're not too tight. Now, this might look a bit short to you, but remember, we need to leave an opening for our bun or our ponytail, okay? So what we want to do now is we want to find the second chain from the hook. So remember, we never count the loop that's on the hook. 1 and 2, and we want to place a single crochet into that stitch. Now this is going to be a 2-row pattern repeat. So this first row is our row 1, we'll call it, of our repeat. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue now into each stitch. We're going to place 1 single crochet into every chain all the way across. Okay, just like that. Once you've finished row 1, your work will look something like this, and you will now have 22 stitches. Remember, we went into the second chain from the hook. So I now have 22 stitches, and now we're going to go on to row 2, and this is what's going to start to form the differences between your brim and the bobble stitches for the body of your hat. So we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. So we're going to start off by creating the brim portion first and then work our way into the bobble part of the hat. So what you want to do is we are going to work into the bottom bars of our stitches. So we've got single crochets here and we're facing the back of these stitches. So if you just kind of turn up here, you can see the V's at the top. These are what the stitches look like from the top. So we've got the front loops, which are the loops that's closest to you. And then we've got the back loops, which are furthest away from you. But if you turn it to the back of the stitch, you're also going to see an additional loop that comes across here. And that is known usually as the bottom bar or the bottom front loop. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we are just going to work our way under that front bottom loop, and you're going to have to help it along a little bit. You're going to insert your hook through there, and you're going to single crochet. And I'm going to do that right away in that first single crochet that I have. And what that's going to do is it's actually, if I just turn this over, that top portion there, that V, you can't see it quite yet, but it's going to push it completely to the front, giving you a nice ribbed knit type of look. So we're going to do a few more. So you're going to go into the next stitch, and you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to help it along. Okay, and you're going to push it up through the bottom bar there. Pull through and single crochet. So we've now done 2. We're going to go into the next one for 3. You're going to do this for a total of 8. Okay. We are going to count that chain 1 that we did. We've done 3 official stitches. So when I turn over my work, now you can see that these V's are being pushed forward. They're much more prominent. Such a great look for a ribbed project. So you're actually going to do a total of 7 single crochets going into the bottom front bar, plus your chain 1 is going to give you a total of 8 stitches. So once you've done an additional 7 single crochets, I'll meet back up with you to talk about the bobble stitch. Okay, so I have done my additional 7 single crochets. So I actually have 8 stitches in total, and you can see it's pushed the tops of those stitches right to the front. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. And so now what you want to do is you just want to make sure you have an even number of stitches left. So it's not the end of the world if you do 1 or 2 more here. You just want to make sure whatever happens here is even to create our bobble. So here we go. We're going to go into the very next stitch. Remember, this stitch has already been worked into the bottom bar. Into the next stitch, we're going to work into the full stitch. You're going to begin a double crochet. So you'll yarn over, insert your hook, you'll pull up that loop as usual. You will yarn over, you'll pull through the first 2, and then leave those 2 loops on your hook. So we're not going to resolve that double crochet. We're going to go back into that stitch with another kind of half started double crochet, for lack of a better way of describing it. So you're going to yarn over, insert back into that same stitch, just like you would do a normal double crochet, pull up a loop. You'll yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops only. Okay, so now you have 3 loops on your hook, and actually you've got 2 unresolved double crochets. So we're not worrying about this one right now. We're going to do this one more time. Yarn over, begin your double crochet as you usually would. Yarn over and pull through 2. You now have 4 loops on your hook, and you have 3 unresolved double crochet stitches. And that is what you're going to do every single time you create a bobble. Okay. Now, once you've got the 4 loops on your hook, you're going to yarn over and you're going to pull through all 4 of those loops. Okay. So it kind of clusters them together. For those of you that remember our cluster stitch wrap, this will kind of look familiar. What's different here is now into the next stitch, we are going to place a single crochet right away into that next stitch. And so what that does is it bunches these stitches down, and on the other side it's created a bobble. Okay, so you can see it's kind of a little bit extra texture there. And that is how we create our bobble. So you need 2 stitches to do that. You do the 3 unresolved double crochets, and then in the next stitch, because the single crochet is such a short stitch, it crunches it down and it pushes the bobble out. So when we're creating the bobble, we're actually working on the back side or the wrong side of your work, okay? And that's what you're going to continue to do. So in the next stitch, we would do that again. We're going to create a bobble. So every time you create a bobble, you begin to create 3 double crochets that are unresolved. So you see, I pull through 2 and I don't finish it. I go on to the next one and pull through. So you can see I've got 3 double crochets unresolved, 4 loops on the hook. I yarn over, pull through all 4, and then in the very next stitch, whoops, I insert a single crochet, and see that's bunching it down, and that's what really secures the bobble. So now if I turn it over, you can really see the bobbles are forming. So this rib is part of our brim, and the bobble is now part of the body. So we are working this way. So now our work is going to be created lengthwise or sideward wise. And that's why it's so important to make sure you have an even number of stitches going to the end. So you're just going to continue doing that. Bobble stitch, single crochet, bobble stitch, single, bobble, single. And you should end up with a single crochet at the very end here. Okay, and that's my last bobble. And now I'm going into that very last stitch. Now it's easy to kind of miss that, so you want to make sure, if you notice a little bit of a dip, there is still a stitch in there, and that's where we chained 1. So you just want to insert your hook there and make sure you finish with a single crochet, and that's what secures your bobble. So now when I turn over the other side, now you can see the texture forming. Just love that. Okay, this is the pattern. Okay, this was the end of row 2, and this will be the repeat. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to repeat row 1, which is all single crochets all the way down, and row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2. So the only thing is row 1, once we get to the brim, there is something slightly different. So you want to, when you're finished row 2, you want to chain 1, turn your work, and immediately go into that very first stitch, place a single crochet, and then you're going to place a single crochet, there's the next stitch there, into each stitch across. So technically that's going to be 2 stitches into each bobble motif. Okay, so I just placed that there. Now I'm just finishing into my last bobble stitch here. Single crochet. And now I have the 8 stitches remaining from my brim. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember that chain 1 counts, okay? So, and if you're ever unsure, just go back and count. You should have, if you did the same number of stitches as I do, you should have 14 stitches here, and it's easy to tell because I've got 7 bobbles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each bobble gets 2 stitches. And now for the remaining 8, I'm going to go back and I'm going to continue to do single crochets. However, I will now work into the back loops only. So these are the bottom bars. I'm not going to do that. For row 1, I will repeat the single crochets, but into the back loops only. So now I'm going to turn so I can see my V's, and I'm just going to push my hook in through the top so I can push that back loop out, and I'm going to single crochet into that. And that will just push forward another rib again, which will continue to make sure that our ribbed portion will stay facing the front of our work. So again, into the next stitch, single crochet, and I do this all the way down. Okay, now I'm going into my last official stitch into the back loop. And you might think you're done, but remember that that chain 1 will always stay hidden here. So you do want to work into that chain 1. So you're going to work into that loop, okay, and single crochet, just like that. So you'll always know you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 single crochets, and then this one began the top of the bobble stitch. Okay, and you can see that it just continues to push those ribs forward. This is your repeat, guys. So now what we're going to do is we're going to repeat row 2. Just going to get you started. You're going to chain 1, turn your work again, and now we're back into working into the bottom front bottom bar, or the front bottom loops. So you've chained 1 right away. This is the back of our stitch. You're going to just help that bottom loop along, push it up, and single crochet. So that's 1. Now remember, the chain 1 counts as 1, so technically that was 2, and this is 3. And here is the 8th one. Okay, when I turn my work, so that's the back of my work, you can see again the stitches were pushed forward. So now you can really see the ribbing is taking effect. Now we're going to go and back into our bobbles again. Now we want to make sure that our bobbles sit nicely one on top of the other. So we are going to go into this very next stitch here. So that one's already been worked. And we're going to do our usual 3 unresolved double crochets is what I like to call them. So you always pull through 2. And at this point, I know I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make sure that everybody gets it. Okay, yarn over, pull through all 4. And the next stitch is a single crochet. What I like to do right away is I just like to turn my work over and make sure that that bobble is sitting nicely one on top of the other. Now, if it ends up working out that they work in between and you like that look, that's okay too. Just for me, it helps me to maintain the proper stitch count and keep things nice and even. So there you go. That is the pattern, guys. Super easy. You're going to repeat the bobble all the way to the end, and then you're going to keep repeating row 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, all the way until you create the length that will wrap around your head snugly. You don't want it to be tight, but you don't want it to be loose, okay? So, for example, I measured my head. I have an average size head, so I measured the circumference of my head, which was 22 inches. So I would recommend you make the length of your fabric 1 inch less. So I always make mine about 21 inches, and that's because the fabric tends to stretch, especially after going in through a few washes and things like that. So you don't want it to be too loose at the end, okay? So if you're following along with me, you're going to go ahead and do yours until you hit about 21 inches. For me, I did 60 rows in total. So I will meet back up with you here once you've done the number of rows that you need. Okay, so I have completed my 60 rows, and actually I did 61, and I'm going to tell you why I did that in a second. So your work will look like this. So you can see where we did the bottom front loops in the single crochets. That has now created the brim of our hat. Okay, and now you can see where we did the bobbles. That's the body. Okay, so we were working on it this way and creating it down the way. So when I did 60 rows, I finished, of course, on that bobble row, and I decided to repeat row one more time, and that is just simply doing all the single crochets going across. The reason why I wanted to add another row is the single crochet row brought me back down to the bottom of the hat. So now when we go to seam up the hat, we are going to use, in this case, I'm going to use the slip stitch method, and I want to be able to slip stitch my way back up and then continue to work the top edge of the hat without having to snip off my yarn. So that is one of the other main reasons why I finished with a 61st row. Okay, so now what we want to do is we are going to seam up the two sides here to create the actual hat, the band that goes around the head. And then we're going to do a couple little finishing rows just at the top. And then this is where we're going to add our hair tie. And we are just about there. So what I recommend is actually taking your fabric and we're going to turn it inside out. Okay. So you want your right sides facing in. You can see that's the back side of our work. And what we're going to do is we are aiming to align all the stitches on this side with all the stitches on this side. And your stitch count should be nice and even. If you're off by one, it's not the end of the world. We're going to fix that. Oh, and by the way, this is how much I have left so far of that skein. So I believe I'm going to have just enough to finish the hat. But like I said, depending on the size of your hat, you may want to pick up a second skein. Okay. So I'm going to grab my hook. I'm going to insert it into the loop that I have. And what I want to do is I am going to use the slip stitch method, and I'm going to work back into the same stitch that I've got here at the very beginning. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to go back into this very first stitch here, and I'm going to work into the front loop only. So that's the loop that's closest to me. I'm going to push my hook up through there. Now what I want to do is I want to go to my other side here and match up to the very first stitch. Now keep in mind, this is going to be your foundation chain row. So you'll be working into those original chains. So it might be a little funky to see, but just kind of turn your work the best you can. So my very first stitch is going to be right there. So I'm going to insert my hook just like that. And then I'm going to pull up a loop all the way through. So this is a slip stitch we're doing. And that's what's going to bring all of our loops together. So you're going to pull through everything. Okay. And that's what you're going to do all the way down. You're going to keep matching it up side by side. So I'm going to go into the next stitch here, insert in the front loop. Okay, just like that. And then find the corresponding stitch on the other side. So I know I've worked into this stitch already. And now I'm going to find the very next chain. Okay. So just like that. You may miss one here and there. It's not the end of the world. We can always fix it as we go along, but just try your best to make sure that they match up even. So I'm going to do a few here because I want you to see the effect. So the front loop, then I find the next stitch. So I know that one's been worked into, and I go into that chain here, pull through all of those, and sometimes your yarn might split, so be careful. And I'm going to do that one more time. Front loop here, and the corresponding stitch. Pull through all of them. Okay, so let me just pull that up here. So you can see on this side, it's just creating a bit of a ridge, and that's okay. So when you pull it, when you turn it back right side out, You can't really see much of it yet, but these ridges will just match up nicely together. Wow, it really doesn't look like much of anything, but you just want to keep slip stitching all the way down until you get to the very last stitch on each side. I'm going to meet up with you there and talk about how we're going to finish off the top of our messy bun hat. This is my very last stitch here. I'm slip stitching and I've reached the top. So when I take my hook out, so the inside seam there looks like that. And now when I turn my hat right side out, okay, so you can see just sits nicely. It created that little ridge there, and it just sits perfectly in there, and it blends in nicely, which I'm very happy with. So now we can actually fit this on our head, or whoever you're making, whoever's head you're making this for, and make sure that it sits, you know, snugly. You don't want it to be tight, but you don't want it to be loose. So we want to make sure it's sitting nice and snug. And of course you can weave this short tail in there whenever you want. But now let's go on and talk about how we're going to finish off the top of our messy bun hat. So we want to keep our work now facing right side out, and this is how we're going to continue to work. Okay, so now we're actually going to be working into the sides of our stitches. So remember, we've been doing our work this way. So the bobbles, the sides of the bobbles are now where we're going to work into. And so because we've been using a row of single crochets and then the bobbles get scrunched down by a single crochet, we're just going to treat all of these rows as single crochet rows. And I'm going to tell you why it's important to mention that. Because if we were to consider this bobble row a double crochet row, it's a taller stitch. Therefore, we'd have to fit more stitches into the side to make it even. So what we're going to do is we are going to now chain one, since we're at the top here, and right into the very first single crochet row. I'm not going to worry about where we just finished our last slip stitch. I'm going to go right into our first single crochet row, which is right here, and I'm going to insert my hook and single crochet. So that is the top of that first single crochet row. And now here you can see this is where our bobble is. That space there belongs to the bobble. So I'm just going to insert my hook there and single crochet again. Just like that. So what we're aiming to do is create a row, a nice finishing row. You know how I like my nice clean edges of single crochets. So then we go into the next space, which will belong to the single crochet row. So it's a tighter space. You insert there, single crochet, and now we have the bobble row. So you can see it's a bigger space. We insert and single crochet. So an easy way of thinking about this is every time you see a bobble, you have to stitch 2 stitches. So each bobble gets 2 stitches along the side. So for me, I have 30 bobbles all the way around. So I know I'm going to end up with 60 stitches in total, and which makes total sense because I have 60 rows. Now remember, my 61st row with that single crochet, I'm just going to ignore that. Okay. So it should be pretty straightforward. The best you want to do is just eyeball it if you're having a hard time finding exactly where to go. Just make sure that your work looks nice and even, that it's not going to pucker or bunch up. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and do that all the way around, and I'll meet back up with you when you're back at your starting seam. Okay, so that was just my last bobble. Now what I'm going to do is I am just going to skip into where I did the very first single crochet, and I'm going to slip stitch to join my round there. Okay, now at this point, if you end up having 61 stitches or 59, it's not the end of the world, but just taking out my hook, you can see that you have a nice finishing edge now along the top of your hat. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add our hair tie, which is going to create a little bit of the bunch at the top, which is what we want, and it should sit nice and snugly. Okay. So what we want to do, so we're going to chain one, okay, and now I'm going to take that hair tie, And I'm just going to hold it up kind of against my work here, so I'll be sure to catch that hair tie. Now I'm going to go into the very next stitch right there, and I'm going to place a single crochet in through that stitch, and I'm going to catch my hair tie at the same time. So hopefully you can see that. Then I'll pull up a loop and finish the single crochet. So now you can see that my hair tie is trapped in there, and that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to go into the very next stitch, single crochet around the hair tie, and single crochet around the hair tie. And then into the next stitch, you will single crochet. Okay, so after you've done 14 single crochets, we want to decrease into the 15th. So I'm going to go ahead and finish until I've got 14 single crochets, and then I'll meet back up with you here shortly. This is my 14th single crochet, and now I'm going to decrease 15 and 16 together. So I'm going to insert my hook and pull up a loop as usual. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch, pull up another loop, and now I'm going to pull through all three. So that brings these two stitches close together as one. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to single crochet 14, decrease 15 and 16, another 14, decrease 15 and 16. I'm going to do that all the way around. Okay, I'm just coming up to the end here, and as you go along, because it is a small opening to fit all of your stitches, what I do is I just stretch my elastic and I push some of these stitches over so you can see that it creates a nice cinched in effect. So if you're thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to fit all these stitches in there? Don't panic. That's the beautiful thing about working with elastic. So I've got one more stitch here. And now I'm just going to slip stitch to the top of my very first single crochet, and that's going to be right about there. I'm going to slip stitch to join, and we are done. So I'm just going to snip off my yarn and fasten off here. I'll just have to weave in this end. And we are good to go. So just to show you guys, that is what the top opening looks like. See how it cinches it in really nicely? And in fact, if you wanted to create more rows and make this into a full hat and close the top, you could put a pom-pom on top and you are off to the races. So here we go, guys. Look at that. It just sits really nicely. I'll just hide that tail there. And now all that's left to do is put it on the head that you are making it for and pop out that ponytail or the bun at the top, and you're rocking it. And it's got this, I love the way the bobble creates this really cool texture. And you have a fun, festive little messy bun ponytail hat. I hope you guys have found this fairly easy and straightforward to work on, and it's always super fun to wear things that you've made yourself. I am sure people are going to make lots of comments on your messy bun hat. It's always been a crowd favorite among crocheters, knitters, and non-fiber crafters. It's just something that makes total sense, especially with those of us with long hair, and it's a great solution. Now, if you have any questions, you know that you can always leave me a comment in the comment box down below. Or as always, just pop me an email directly at info@crochetcrafty.com. And if you visit my website, crochetcrafty.com, you'll find all kinds of information on some of the other things I'm up to, including interactive online classes and our monthly newsletter and all kinds of fun stuff. Which reminds me, if you are not currently subscribed to the Stitch Sessions, you really should do so. Just press that red little button and make sure to click the notification bell, and that will keep you up to date on all of the tutorials I upload every week. Now, I upload a tutorial every Wednesday, and there are times when I'll upload additional content like a crochet quick chat or a stitch session conversation. In the meantime, we can enjoy interacting with each other right here on YouTube or on social media. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Stitch Sessions. In the meantime, I hope you guys have an amazing day. Take good care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next session. Take care.